Listen to these words from the 4th chapter of the Gospel according to Mark. On that day, as evening drew on, he said to them, "Let us cross to the other side." Leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat just as he was, and other boats were with him. A violent squall came up, and waves were breaking over the boat, so that it was already filling up. Jesus was in the stern, asleep on a cushion. They woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" He woke up, rebuked the wind, and said to the sea, "Quiet, be still." The wind ceased, and there was great calm. Then he asked them, "Why are you terrified? Do you not yet have faith?" They were filled with great awe and said to one another, "Who then is this whom even wind and sea obey?" So I had fun coming up with the titles for these talks today because I just knew that I would somehow incorporate a title from Simon and Garfunkel. I don't know why. That was like the first thought I had. Mrs. Robinson, of course, wouldn't work. Bridge Over Troubled Water was just way too depressing. Nice song, but depressing. The Boxer certainly tells a compelling story, and it's among my very favorites, but again, not for this retreat. Mumford & Sons, if you're familiar with that group, they do a really good cover of The Boxer. I guess I could have gone with Homeward Bound. You might be surprised, I actually surprised myself, that I did not choose The Sound of Silence. Hello, darkness, my old friend. Come to talk with you again. And I'm still not exactly sure what a Scarborough Fair is. Instead, I went with the 59th Street Bridge Song, also known as Feelin' Groovy. The title for this talk is actually the opening lyrics from this song. "Slow down, you move too fast." And they go on to sing, I'm not going to sing. "You got to make the morning last, just kicking down the cobblestones, looking for fun and feeling groovy." Slow down. I imagine God is constantly saying this to all of us, but how often do we stop to hear it? Which is precisely why he's saying it. Just because we are Catholic, or soon to be, for some of you out there, it does not mean our domestic lives are likely any different from anyone else. Most of us have jobs. We all have some kind of extracurricular activities, I'm sure. We have to balance the time spent in these areas with the demands of family life, whether you live with them or not. Friends, exercise, meals, sleep, which for many ends up being the last thing on the list. The point is, we all have lists. Many of us carry this list in our pockets. I know I do. It's called Google Calendar. It's even all color-coded and neatly organized. I don't exactly schedule my sleep, but sometimes I wonder why I don't make that appointment. And speaking of sleep, how in the world could Jesus sleep through a storm on the Sea of Galilee? You ever wonder that? I've been there. I've seen the storms which creep up out of nowhere. I've seen the type and size of boat that Jesus and his disciples would have been on. In fact, I hop on a plane tomorrow to go there. I'll be in the Holy Land for the next 10 days or so, my second pilgrimage in as many years. Mark says that the waves were breaking over the side of the boat, and it was literally already filling up with water. And Jesus is sound asleep on a cushion. Weathered ship captains, whether they are, Navy, Marines, Coast Guard, just even, fishing vessels, Gosh, I think of Shackleton, his great adventure. These people know the sea. They know their ship. They can probably sleep through things that most people could not in that scenario. But when the ship is going down violently, what captain would or could sleep through it? Oh, captain, my captain. Jesus, what are you doing? Are these not the thoughts that his disciples in the boat with him would have had? And they eventually wake him to say, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" Death would have appeared imminent to all of them. These men have already dropped everything by this point, their livelihood, to follow him. And at this moment, I'm sure many, if not all of them, were like, this guy has fallen asleep at the wheel. We've put our lives into his hands, and it seems like he is just not paying attention. We have handed over our itinerary to this man. Everything we do with him, for him, because of him. It would be like you and I handing over our phone to someone else to populate our calendar with whatever they wish and to remove whatever they want. But we populate our own calendars, don't we? We all have things to do. What does set us apart from the rest of the world, as Christians, first of all, is that beyond our domestic and familial appointments, we also schedule church. I imagine for many, church actually finds its way onto their Google Calendar. I know it does mine, because I have to know which masses I am scheduled to offer. It kind of presents a problem if I don't show up to the mass that I'm scheduled to be at. And speaking of mass, we as Catholics, which sets us even further apart from the world, don't just go to church. We participate in the one holy sacrifice on Calvary offered by God's only Son, represented every Sunday, every day, in fact. And for many, it often is another item on the weekly agenda and can become only that, even for many daily mass goers. But back to what I mentioned earlier about the many cusps that we have in life. What is a cusp, first of all? Well, it's a noun. The first definition is that it is a pointed end where two curves meet, in particular. Definition has import to architecture, anatomy, obviously mathematics. And there's also astrological use of the word, which we're not really concerned with. The third definition, which seems to echo the first, is that a cusp is a point of transition between two different states of being. On the grand scale, most of us have crossed through one or two extreme cusps in life. So for me, becoming a priest was kind of a big deal. The moment Bishop Jugas laid his hands on me during the ordination rite was a significant cusp. My state of being immediately after this moment in time was completely different than what it was just prior. It happened when I was ordained a deacon, too. These are ontological changes in states of being, but I also passed through a rather uncomfortable cusp when I stepped foot on seminary grounds for the first time, after being a bachelor for so many years. For those of you who are married, your wedding day would have been a rather weighty cusp for you, perhaps even your engagement day. But then we start looking at other areas and episodes in our life when we graduate from college or high school. Going back further, even when you graduate from elementary school now. That wasn't the case, at least when I was growing up. You move to another school building. Would that not also be a transition from one state to another? And not just schooling, what about changes in jobs, more acutely, if you've ever changed your career? Maybe entering retired life. And I don't mean to exhaust the list even there. Point being, across the board, each one of us at some point or points in our life took some very deep breaths as we passed through this point, this cusp, from one reality to the next. And we identify those fairly well, I think, but remember I said I believe that life is full of these transitions. Not the same caliber or gravity as some of these life-changing moments, but I argue that daily we move from one state to another, or at least we should. If this seems like a foreign concept to you, then I ask you, how do you pray each day? And many of you will say, well, I do. I even am one of those daily mass goers you referenced just a minute ago. And that's great. Keep it up. But I wonder how many of us respect the cusp between our life out there and our life in here. Although it's not just a matter of being under the roof of a church or not. I mean, your relationship with God and your relationship with the world and the people who are in the world. The difference between your prayer life, liturgically and privately, and your domestic life. How do you bounce back and forth from one to the other? Because if it feels like bouncing, this talk is especially for you. I'm not breaking the seal of the confessional by saying this because it's a very, very common sin to confess. But many people accuse themselves of not paying attention at Mass, being distracted. Their private prayer and devotions are often very dry, which can sometimes be a period of desolation that our Lord actually wants you to experience. But when it is dry because they get to the end of a rosary or liturgy of the hours or whatever else they might be praying and experience a jolt because they realize they were moving their lips but thinking about something completely different. Something else, usually their day. I would venture to say that these people are not respecting the cusp. We can't just move from one thing to another without preparation. Switching gears might be quick and easy for a bicycle, but we humans need more time. Depending on what we are transitioning between throughout any given day, might necessitate, let's say, a decrease in our heart rate, for example. It might require those long, deep breaths I mentioned earlier. Maybe a particular emotion has grabbed hold of you and would not be fitting for whatever you have to do next. Sometimes you're in between a rock and a hard place. Tired and completely stressed out from work only to have to walk in the front door of your home to an entirely different world of tiring and stressful things. I'm sure most of you know what I'm talking about. We always need to prepare for what comes next, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, sometimes physically. Seeing as conversation with God is categorically different than anything else we do in life, how in the world can we expect to just drop everything and immediately enter into a contemplative posture when we've decided it's time for that? Prior to them getting on the boat, Jesus had been telling his disciples and a great crowd which had formed many parables. He told them the parable about the sower, the lamp, the mustard seed. He also tried to explain to his disciples what the parables meant and why he only spoke to them in parables. He was teaching. And then he says to his disciples, "Let us cross to the other side." The next day, immediately after disembarking from the boat on the other side of the sea, as we hear in the beginning of Mark chapter 5, Jesus encounters the Gerasene demoniac and heals him. He expels the demons who were tormenting him. And so one moment, he is teaching. Another moment, he is healing. And in between, we have this calming of the storm at sea. It is just one cusp in the daily life of Jesus. Something he was trying, rather, to sleep through. He is God, but he's also man. A man needs his sleep, after all. Even though the world was tumultuous all around him, he slowed down to the point of sleep. Now, don't fall asleep, especially as you're driving to church. But also don't dwell on the worries of life. So don't wait until you are in a pew or on your knees to tune out the world and tune into God. Give your soul time to adjust. Pray before you pray, essentially. Slow down. God is not going anywhere. But if we are constantly going, even if it is to many good holy things, how can he possibly break through the noise? When Jesus woke up, he rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Quiet, be still." The wind ceased, and there was a great calm. But I imagine he was not just talking to the sea. He says it for us to hear, if we would only stop to listen, because he wants us to be calm too. He wants us to slow down, because we are moving entirely too fast. He wants us feeling groovy.